Hello, Paul Pounds. So today I want to look at Panther Books, specifically kind of 70s horror Panther Books, because personally for me, and there's going to be some personal stuff in this video, but I think I can probably get away with squeezing that in. I'll put some facts in, and there's going to be a ton of book covers popping up here. So even if I'm quite boring, there's going to be lots of beautiful book covers to look at. So Panther Books, right, don't get cross at me if you're a Panther book collector like I am, but Panther Books were nothing special. They started in the early 50s as largely a paperback imprint, and then they embraced that and ran with that completely and didn't do any hardbacks. And I think this was a financial decision. They reprinted hardbacks published by other publishers in paperback form. So you already had your market research. There was no reading manuscripts submitted by authors and seeing if you thought it'd sell. There was none of that. All the people that set up Panther, they knew. They picked successful hardbacks. So they knew that it was going to be a decent seller. It was a business rather than, I think, something born out of passion. So it was set up by Hamilton's Limited in 52. And I say they did nothing special. The 50s and early 60s painted covers are stunning to look at. And I wish I could afford to collect them all just for the covers. But a lot of publishers did beautifully painted covers around that time. If you look at Hodder paperbacks from that era, they are gorgeous. A gorgeous painted cover was largely the industry standard. So they were bought out in the late 60s by Granada, who are the same Granada that are involved in TV production and motorway service stations. And then in the 80s they were bought by HarperCollins, and that's when the Panther imprint kind of died. So a lot of the early paperbacks are popular fiction, not like hardcore sleaze, but slightly spicy, bit of action, bit of a detective thing going on, something that you could just enjoy a pulpy fun read of. In the 70s, their science fiction imprint was pretty staggering and huge, and they published an awful lot of key sci-fi titles in paperback. But it's the 70s horror. 70s horror? You, horror book blurb man, interested in 70s horror? You've never mentioned it before. The first book I ever bought was, with my own money, that I went into town and bought myself, was a hardback collection of Edgar Allan Poe stories illustrated by Arthur Rackham. And it wasn't because I had impeccable taste. I went into a little second-hand bookshop in the city of Wakefield, where I grew up, and just said there was a chap in there who I eventually became firm friends with, and I just said, I want some classic horror. And he was like, great, you want this, young man? Pulled this beautiful Poe volume off the shelf, and I ran home quite happy and read it. His bookshop, this is some of the personal things, sorry, book covers distract you, it's fine. His bookshop was actually a house, and it's one of those bookshops that, and I'm sure you've all got them, bookshops that you yearn for, that you look back and think, it was stacked floor to ceiling with so many amazing paperbacks and just forgotten novels and collections of stories. And it was run by a chap called George, who just kind of sat and held court in the middle of stacked book dusty chaos. You don't get that anymore, do you? And he would steer the conversation, and it would often be about Gnosticism or UFOs or Crowley, and he was the kindest, most gentlest, most passionate book lover I've ever met, and I miss that shop terribly. Anyway, back to Panther. The second time I ever went in that shop, I spotted these on the shelf. And I thought, they look interesting. And I kind of know the name Lovecraft in association with that kind of classic horror. It was a name I'd heard. And at 95 pence each, I thought, yeah, let's do that and grab those. And to be honest, they absolutely blew me away. This was the era of... This was late 80s. So this was the era of Stephen King and Dean Koontz. And that's what my friends were reading. And I found these stories and novellas by Lovecraft that instigated horror by demonstrating how insignificant, not my life, but every human life was. And it was like... And that set me on a path, and it shaped how I collected paperbacks and read paperbacks and saw paperbacks. So the next Panther book I got from that shop was, because I did go back quite a lot, obviously, as you would, was a Panther copy of William Hope Hodgson's Carnacki the Ghost Finder. Again, I saw the cover and didn't understand. So if you think to 80s horror paperbacks, as much as I adore them, they are very literal. They show you, if it's a gory one, they show you something gory on the cover. If it's a longer, slightly sinister one, they show you something spooky on the cover. I just didn't understand what was being presented to me. So again, I read it, and at this point I didn't realise that Panther were a hardback reprint company, pretty much, and I was inadvertently buying lots of beautiful works that were written in the 30s and 40s and then published by Arkham House. So these are pretty much, and I don't know if it was I think it was probably a financial decision, because Panther was always run like a business, and Arkham House not being huge, if a large British paperback company came to them and said, we want to reprint your back catalogue, that's some good revenue there for Arkham House, who weren't a huge publisher. I can't think about Panther without thinking about the covers, and that's another thing that they taught me, that it's like a symbiotic relationship. A good cover is equally as important as good contents. It makes, if you think about like Lennon and McCartney, they did alright and had some chart success on their own, but together they could create something that's bigger than them as individuals. And I think a beautiful and well-designed book cover does the same. It makes the book a complete item, with the cover being equally as important as the text the book contains. Don't hate me for that. And Panther had that amazing mix of art, amazing art, and there's some amazing artists and Panther credited a lot of them on the back cover, which not a lot of publishers did. So you get like Les Edwards, Bruce Pennington, Anthony Roberts, Bob Folk, that presented cover art that was as unsettling as the contents of the book. And that I've been a lifelong, or since me teenage years, I've been a lifelong fan of Panther. Just because they are such a beautiful product. The whole thing, the design, the contents, they're just perfect for me. And it got me into a very odd habit that only book collectors seem to have, especially paperback collectors. You collect and read by publisher. I do. And a lot of the YouTubers that I look at collect by publisher and do read those books. And it introduced me to kind of almost forgotten authors. I don't like using that word, but authors that were maybe bigger in the 40s and 50s than they were in the 70s and 80s. And it introduced me to some of my favourite authors, some Panther reprinted books by Clark Ashton Smith, Robert Bloch, Arthur Machen. Panther introduced me to Machen, and I am a huge Arthur Machen fan. And early works by like Fritz Leiber, I'm never sure, but I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments whether it's Lee or Lie. Unfortunately, price-wise, Panther Books have got a bit of a cult following. And I hope I never come across in my videos like, hey, I've got all these books and you haven't, and they're really expensive. I can't afford to pay a lot for my paperbacks. I was just lucky enough to pick them up when nobody was really interested in them, and I've managed to keep them through burglaries and house moves and the trials and tribulations of moving about and life generally. I've always hung on to them. When I moved out my parents, I think I was about 16, I had an army duffel bag that was half full of tartan trousers and the Damned t-shirts, and the other half was full of Panther paperbacks. And I couldn't afford a telly in my first bed sit, so I just used to sit and read all night, every night. Anyway, sorry, back to values. Yeah, they've got a bit of a cult following. They are quite highly regarded. So they're not super expensive like some of the higher end and rarer New English Library ones are. But a lot of them will cost you between kind of 20 to 40, somewhere around there. Obviously there's always ones cheaper, so do keep looking and do keep regularly checking online booksellers, and if a book dealer issues catalogues, then make sure you're first on that catalogue to see if there's any reasonably priced Panthers in there. And a lot of the stories have been reprinted. You can find the contents elsewhere, especially authors like Lovecraft has been reprinted so very, very many times. But these are just the perfect mix for me, in my humblest of opinions, the perfect mix of visual style and narrative content. I don't think, for my money, I don't think horror books could be more perfect than 70s horror Panther paperbacks. And that's it. Thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video.